Greetings everyone, I am Dr. J, and welcome to another episode of Through the Looking Glass, where I take a look at old games that I never got a chance to play to see if they still hold up. In this video, I take a look at an interesting game due to its genre bending, Drakan, Order of the Flame. I wouldn't blame you if this is the first time you've heard of this game, as it's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think classic video game. Yet, when I was thinking back on it, the game seemed criminally overlooked, as I remember my dad and sister enjoying it a great deal, and because it was a game involving dragons. Let's face it, not enough games have you controlling dragons, and yet nobody seems to remember this one. Part of it might be that you can't find it in stores anymore, as the way I got it was by digging out my family's original CD. I don't remember too much of it, apart from the setting and premise, so I feel that I don't know enough to tarnish my view of it too much, even if my brother was far too talkative about the finer details while I was trying to play it. The story is probably one of the best elements, as the premise is really cool. Long ago, so long ago that few even remember its legacy, there was the Order of the Flame. This order was responsible for keeping peace in the world of Drakan for centuries, drawing their power from a special bond between a dragon and its rider. However, as we all know, this wouldn't be a fantasy game without some sort of evil threatening the land, and back then it was the Dark Union, a fragment of the Order which sought for itself dominance over the world. The resulting war between the Order and the Dark Union shattered both organizations and left the world in chaos, to where both fell into obscurity and the world was left alone to deal with the evil creatures still wandering around. Your story picks up with medieval Rin, as a group of warthogs, basically the game's version of orcs, pillage her town, killing or capturing everyone, including her younger brother, Dylan. You find a priest in the village still alive, and with his dying breath, he tells you to seek the help of the Order of the Flame, as he suspects that there is more going on than merely a raid on a single village. Your goal is to do whatever it takes to find your brother, even if it means engaging in the bonding ritual with one of the Order's dragons, and getting yourself tied into fighting a much larger battle. The main problem isn't the story itself, but rather its execution. The premise is great, the intrigue is good, and there is usually a clear objective. However, it never feels like enough time has been given to develop the characters. At first, the dragon she bonds to, Arok, is very dismissive of her, but in the first third or half of the game, he seemed rather comfortable complimenting her. Granted, we have had to go through a decent amount before that point, but there isn't a gradual progression where we get to see Rin gain Arok's respect, so it comes off as rather sudden. Though we've done a lot, it didn't feel like that respect was truly earned, that it was more obligatory. In another case, we don't get much of a connection with Dylan, as pretty much as soon as we meet him, he's been kidnapped, and all we have to work off is Rin's insistence on rescuing him. The worst part where this happens, however, is at the ending. Without spoiling too much, it ended on a cliffhanger and made me want to throw the games industry off of a cliff with it.
And
What?
That's the end.
What? You effing what, mate? I just suffered through having to replay a good chunk of the game for that. For a frickin' cliffhanger. For a game that I will end up not ending to... Really?
I think that owl's given the right expression to...
Anger? Yeah. That's how I feel right now. Come on. It was all going so well. Up until that ending. No wonder why I don't have any memory of how it ended, because it didn't end! How many games am I gonna play in this friggin' series that have cliffhangers? First Half-Life, now this. For the most part, the dialogue falls too much into the explain everything trap, where too much time is devoted to setting up the world and scenario while not enough time is given to developing the characters, which makes it harder to get invested in their fate. These kinds of stories can still work, however, if we are able to see the characters mature based on how they react to the adventure. In order to make that work, though, there has to be more time given to how they feel about a situation, apart from just tone of voice. In some ways, the game seems ahead of its time. As if they had been able to do facial expressions, the graphics could easily have helped us connect to them. It doesn't help that the voice acting is questionable in some places, but apart from the explain everything trap, the story also struggles because of a gameplay clash. The pacing for the gameplay is great, always keeping us moving forward, always presenting a new challenge, and giving us a lot of gameplay variety despite the mechanics being relatively simple. There are some areas that felt slightly repetitive and a couple I got stuck on, but nothing that felt completely unnecessary. This is good in theory, but what the gameplay required to make that pacing work didn't give enough time for the story to be fully fleshed out. It would have been nice to have had more time with Dylan, for instance, before he was dragged off in the Wartalk raid. That way we could see more of how Rin and Dylan interacted. However, inevitably that raid is going to come, and despite whatever gameplay is set up before then, such as if you have to fight your way to him, inevitably you'll get overwhelmed. It is not fun to win a fight only to find out that you technically lost, such as with some movie license games. It's also not fun to be given a challenge that can't be overcome which you are supposed to lose, as it runs completely counter to the whole point of the experience. The last thing you need is to give us an idea that perhaps if we lose in certain areas that it might be story driven. Even if you were to rely on a cutscene for that and still have a basic tutorial, it would take us out of the action right as things get interesting, which is also not a good idea. In short, while it would have been good to get more of a background for Rin and Dylan, it isn't necessarily a good idea to do so from a gameplay perspective, especially given that it would have opened up another chance to complain about the gameplay flaws. Since that we're on the topic, what exactly does said gameplay entail? It's a bit strange at first, because it relies on two different gameplay loops to keep us engaged. The first and more prominent one involves Rin herself, as you play a basic third-person action RPG with Tomb Raider's exploration and level navigation. The second involves riding Aerok through the skies as you become an aerial menace, able to effectively deal with most enemies you encounter. Let's focus on Rin's gameplay first, as that's the more prominent one. The combat itself is fairly simple, but it can be a little strange at first. You're given a small inventory with which you can store weapons, armor, arrows, potions, and area-specific items such as keys. The weapons themselves have a decent amount of variety, but how often you use them is important throughout the game. Apart from the dagger that you get at the beginning and a couple of weapons later in, everything either has limited durability or is a consumable, which means any action you take is going to cause some damage. There is no way to repair weapons, so you will have to manage your loadout properly so as to not cause yourself problems. This is a good idea in theory, but at least on the default difficulty, if you're exploring a fair amount, then you almost never have problems with finding enough weapons and armor. The only thing that is really a problem is finding enough healing potions and arrows, and managing those without knowing what exactly was coming next did keep me on my toes. There are only so many to be found throughout the game, so one must tread carefully so as to not take any unnecessary damage. Fortunately, you can quick save pretty much at any time, so even if you royally mess up an area, you can make an opportunity to try again. Rule number one with any old game: save early, save often. Once that you actually get to the combat, it's fairly simple. Left click to swing, right click to block or zoom in with bow and arrow, and strafing around to avoid hits where possible. This is where problems start to enter the mix, as the hitboxes for everything are unreliable. Sometimes hits connect on both sides when you don't think they should have, other times they don't hit when you clearly nailed them. One of the weirder aspects is that, in order to hit enemies that are low to the ground, such as these spiders, you have to actually crouch down to hit them rather than just looking down and swinging. It also doesn't help that weapons have different swinging speeds and length, which means while you can nail them from this length with a longsword, good luck doing anything with your short-range battle axe. It does add some strategic variance between the weapons, but it's hard to take advantage of that element when you're flailing wildly just trying to hit your target. At least you can sneak up on enemies by holding down shift, especially when it meant sneaking past a really nasty enemy. Or you can just run away like a coward. Oh crap, run, 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 run. Run, 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 run. Wait, did they hurt themselves with their own waves of fire? That ain't normal. You know what, if I don't have to fight you, why should I? Yeah, I don't feel like fighting you. Bye-bye. No thank you. I'm going back to my Drakan. I think the combat would have been a little better had we at least been given a health bar for enemies. These flame sword enemies here take a lot of hits to knock down, and are really hard to defend against without either abusing the weaknesses in the AI, or using your bow. As it stands, fighting these guys was frustrating because it was hard to know how much time I would need to spend killing them, and that's assuming I don't die very often either. While the combat may not be the greatest ever, the Tomb Raider style exploration and puzzle solving more than makes up for it. It's not particularly challenging, but the pacing and variety are really well done. There are very few times where I felt there was any repetition in the puzzle solving. One moment you're dodging traps, another you're setting up something to avoid or disarm a different set of traps. The next you're doing some basic platforming. The next you have to figure out how to proceed forward without getting crushed. There are a couple of insanely frustrating ones that rely too much on randomness, but at least it was only 2 or 3 rooms. Overall, the gameplay on the ground is decent, but finicky in places. flying around on Airok was both fun and somewhat annoying. This is where the enemy variety is at its strongest, as you have to deal with projectiles thrown or fired from the ground, other dragons, and a cool scenario later in the game which I don't dare spoil. You start off with a default fire breath, and as you play through the game, you gain access to different attacks, providing more options for how to take down enemies. Apart from the poison shot, each one has an alternate fire which essentially doubles the number of attacks available to you. For instance, the Ice Beam's default attack shoots a slow but powerful shot that deals a beating to anyone it hits. However, its alternate fire shoots 3 smaller projectiles which home into their target, meaning you can use one for hitting a stable target and the other for dealing with more mobile foes. All of these attacks do use up a slowly regenerating ammo globe, however, so resource management here is often key to staying alive. However, playing Airok highlights some of the problems with the combat throughout, especially with how difficult it is to control. Flying Airok has you use WASD for movements as you would expect, as well as the mouse to guide your path and aim. The mouse controls for Airok are just weird though. If you are staying in place, then the mouse can be used to look pretty much wherever you want, although it will slowly move Airok back to being completely horizontal. When you start flying, however, instead of turning like you might expect, he tilts in one direction. This isn't bad in theory, as it can help make wide turns, but when you need him to course correct immediately, you have to move the mouse forward, let Airok even out, and then maybe you can go forward, or you have to completely stop in midair, which often isn't an option when you have a dragon or giant attacking you. The only other problem I have with the air combat is that it's a little too easy to exploit. Exploiting the AI is possible throughout all of the combat, but considering how many hits everything takes, it sorts itself out. However, the air combat becomes much easier once you learn how good the alt fire on your default fire breath is. As soon as I figured that out, I seldom ever used any of the other attacks given to me because it was so powerful. Damage in the game is coded as a set amount that applies whenever you hit the enemy, but since the fire breath is technically hitting every millisecond or so when it's up, even if you make the default damage excessively low, that damage can easily add up over time to be far more potent than it should be. Assuming you can get into range, pretty much nothing can withstand you for very long, not even the end boss fight. It made the aerial combat much easier than it should have been, and if I were to go back and play without using it, I have a feeling it would be much more intense and overall more fun. As for the rest of the game, the graphics, as I've mentioned, don't do the game any favors. It's definitely a game that was made in the late 90s, as the first time moving lips were ever seen in a game was with Half-Life, at least not without the huge polygonal mouths. For some reason I could never activate anti-aliasing, which made the polygons stand out more, but the game does by some miracle scale to 1080p. However, it does sometimes throw off the camera on the pseudo cutscenes, causing it to focus on Rin's chest rather than her face, as if we needed another reminder as to how similar you are to old school Lara Croft. As for game length and difficulty, according to my footage, it took me about 9.5 hours to complete. Clear out a bit of backtracking and a couple other times where I was a complete idiot, and it probably would have been shortened to 8, but it felt like the right length, even if I'm still annoyed about how it ended. The audio can sometimes bug out when it comes to death audio and with some of the war talk yells, but it wasn't terribly distracting. The audio overall is serviceable, as it does what it's supposed to do, isn't distracting or annoying, but isn't spectacular. The audio balance between the in-game actions and voice is a bit off for my liking, but at least the music can be adjusted as needed. The music, however, is pretty good. This might be nostalgia talking, as the CD could function as an audio disc if you have something to play it in, but I love this kind of atmospheric music. It doesn't do too much to stand out, but it's nice to listen to. Bear in mind, however, that this game has one major problem if you're trying to run it on a modern operating system. Whenever you try and select a difficulty, the game will crash. You can still play it by entering developer mode and selecting Ruined Village, but by doing this, it keeps you from manually selecting any difficulty other than medium. It's kind of a shame since that there are 2 difficulty levels above the default and 1 below that. Given how frustrating fighting the Flamesword guys was, it would have been nice to either avoid it or make it worse as I saw fit. Still, if you are looking to play it, I'll post a link in the description for instructions on how to make it work. Now that you've heard me point out a lot of the flaws with the game, many of you who didn't play it might be asking yourself, why did people like this again? To explain that, I feel that we need to examine the game at the time of creation. To start, the premise is a great idea. Tomb Raider style exploration where we get to fly a dragon? That sounds awesome. Were there flaws? Of course, and even the reviews that looked at it in a positive light noticed them. However, to my knowledge, this kind of genre bending hadn't been done to this extent in the gaming industry before. The closest that I can think of is maybe Diablo or Dungeon Keeper, but both of them were very different games from Drakan. Sure, both aspects of the game are flawed, But there had never been two gameplay elements so seamlessly woven together and important to each other, and I think that's what a lot of people were drawn to. Talking with my dad about it, who played it closer to when it was released, he fully admitted that the controls were frustrating, but he kept pushing on because the premise was so good. While the controls were frustrating, they were never too frustrating. Playing it myself, I know that there is bound to be some nostalgia taking place, as I did see it played when I was younger and more impressionable. Usually finicky controls would be a deal breaker for me, but for some reason I still found myself engaged. At its core, I think the main reason for this is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. The game may be too short for us to truly get an understanding of the world, but the pacing for the gameplay itself is perfect. The game recognizes that the core mechanics that drive it are relatively simple, albeit imperfect, so it makes sure to constantly display a new objective and make it feel like we are progressing forward. There's often a new piece of gear to collect. There's always something that has to be found in order to progress forward. Everything feels tied into the main objective, and helps to keep us on the right path. If one of the halves of this game were taken away, I would have never recommended this, but together it's much easier to make a call. In the end, my recommendation for this is a mixed one, and that's assuming that you can even find it. If you can, it might be worth checking out, as the premise and pacing are good, but the controls can be hard to deal with. Not impossible since the game allows quick saves, but still annoying. Just bear in mind that you'll have to tinker with it a bit to get it working, and you'll have to find it somewhere other than a traditional gaming store. Perhaps poking GOG to get it on their store might be a good idea, cough cough incense. However, I do have to warn you of the area that caused me to lose some progress. In one of the rooms late in the game, you have to face off against a group of enemies in order to move on. But because of the way the enemies are programmed, it's possible that one of them will get stuck where you can't reach. And you will need a save outside of that room, otherwise you will get stuck. Because I didn't see this coming, I had to use the autosave, which started me all the way back to when I first entered that area. So if you see this room, do not use your quick save while in it, or have a backup save just in case. With that warning given, that's all I have for this video. Thank you all for watching. Please like and share this video if you find it deserving, and keep an eye on this channel for the next game in Through the Looking Glass, as well as other content posted on a not so regular basis. Now, would you kindly run off? I need to dive into the next adventure.